Today, we are diving into the incredibly tense situation between the United States and Iran. You know, a series of military face-offs and some very high-stakes diplomatic chess moves have pushed these two nations right to the brink, to a point that some experts are now calling a razor's edge.
And just to get a grip on how serious this is, listen to this warning from Mark Chandler, a former senior defense intelligence official. The situation is so fragile that one tiny misstep, one little miscalculation, could unleash a much, much bigger conflict.
So, how in the world did we get here? How did we get to this razor's edge? Well, it really starts with the military flashpoints, these specific incidents out in the waters of the Middle East that have just poured gasoline on the fire.
And these close calls have been happening in some of the most critical waterways on the planet, the Arabian Sea and, of course, the Strait of Hormuz. The encounters there have become, frankly, dangerously provocative.
Okay, so first, let's talk about a direct drone confrontation. An Iranian drone makes what U.S. Central Command described as an aggressive move toward the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln. The U.S. said they tried to warn it off, but those warnings were ignored, so a Navy fighter jet took it down. And the key thing here, from the U.S. perspective, wasn't just about surveillance. They saw this as a necessary defensive move against a dangerous weapon that could have been loaded with explosives.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The information war kicked off almost immediately. The U.S. military was clear. The drone was a threat. But at the same time, they were confident their defenses were so good it had less than a 1% chance of ever getting close. Meanwhile, over in Iran, a semi-official news agency was claiming a victory, saying their drone sent all its pictures back to base just moments before it was destroyed. Two completely different stories.
And the tension didn't stop there, not by a long shot. Just hours after that drone was shot down, Iran's Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, swarmed a civilian ship. We're talking IRGC boats and another drone racing towards a U.S.-flagged merchant vessel, even threatening to board and seize it. It took a U.S. destroyer scrambling with air support to get them to back off. This is starting to look like a real pattern, right?
And this number right here, this shows you exactly why this is all so alarming. The Strait of Hormuz, a place where a massive chunk of the world's oil passes through, is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest. The shipping lanes themselves are even tighter. It makes it incredibly easy for Iran's fast boats and drones to cause chaos and threaten the entire global economy.
Now, at the very same time all this military drama was unfolding, the diplomatic world had its own shakeup. Out of nowhere, the location for these crucial talks between the U.S. and Iran was changed, and it looked like another strategic power play from Tehran.
So the original plan was to meet in Istanbul. That was seen as pretty neutral ground, a place where the U.S. wanted to talk about the whole shebang, including Iran's missile program. But then, at the last minute, Iran insisted they move the talks to Oman. And analysts say that's basically a home field advantage for Iran, not just because of geography, but because it let them box in the conversation and say, nope, we are only talking about the nuclear program.
Now, you might think the U.S. would just walk away after Iran basically changed the rules of the game, but they didn't. They agreed to the new terms. And that move really signals that the U.S. is serious about keeping that diplomatic door open, showing some flexibility to try and find a peaceful way through this.
So what is Iran's goal here? What's the strategy? Because this mix of military pokes and diplomatic power moves, well, it isn't random. Let's try to decode what's really going on. Based on intelligence analysis,
when you look at the analysis, a clear playbook emerges. First, they're probing, right? Poking the bear to see where the U.S. red lines really are. Second, they're using the talks themselves to stall and buy more time. Third, they're trying to control the whole narrative by dictating the terms and just constantly messaging strength. And it's so important to remember, they're not just playing to the U.S. They have a global and a regional audience watching all of this.
But this is where it gets really, really tough for the diplomats. As Mark Chandler points out, Iran has a long history of being, well, duplicitous in these talks. The track record is one of making deals and then breaking them. And that history just casts this huge shadow over everything. How do you build trust? It's incredibly difficult.
So all of this brings us to the final critical question. Where do we go from here? With the stakes this high, what does a real solution even look like? And what happens if these talks just completely fall apart?
Let's actually define what success would be. If diplomacy is the goal, what are the absolute non-negotiables? What would the U.S. and its partners have to get in any potential deal with Iran to call it a win?
From the American side, any real deal comes down to three key things. Number one, Iran has to come clean with full transparency about its nuclear weapons program.
and that includes finally admitting it exists. Number 2, international inspectors have to get immediate, unfettered access, no restrictions. And number 3, any agreement has to deal with Iran's massive and frankly destabilizing offensive missile arsenal.
So this leads to what you'd call a dual-track approach. The U.S. is genuinely at the table trying to make a deal work, but they're not naive. They are also at the same time preparing for the very real possibility that diplomacy fails and military action becomes the only option left.
And that leaves us right here with this final, sobering question. The world is obviously hoping for a diplomatic breakthrough, but with Iran's history of stalling, combined with these recent aggressive moves, you really have to ask yourself, is a larger conflict at this point simply unavoidable?